rapidly escalates by land and sea.
Israeli airstrikes just hit central Beirut. Reuters reporting they were less than a kilometer from the government headquarters. This after Iran-backed Hezbollah fired a huge barrage of rockets from Lebanon into Israel.
And a statement said to be from Iran's new supreme leader was read live on state TV in Iran. In it, Mojtaba Khamenei says the vital Strait of Hormuz will remain essentially closed. This, as sources say, U.S. intelligence shows that there is no sign the Iranian regime is collapsing.
Iran is continuing to target tankers in the Gulf region. 2 foreign oil tankers in Iraqi waters were set on fire, killing at least 1 person. The International Energy Agency says that the world is now facing the largest supply disruption in history of the global oil market. Joining us now is senior columnist from Jerusalem Post, Yaakov Katz. He's also an author and senior fellow at the Jewish People Policy Institute. Yaakov, it's good to see you. I know that you've recently argued that the IDF had always assumed that at some point Hezbollah would enter this war and this fight with Iran. But the assessment among Israeli intelligence officials and government officials seem to have been that Hezbollah and their capabilities had been significantly degraded given the war with Israel over the last year or so. But during the ceasefire, they clearly have been able to amass and reconstitute some of their weaponry here, given that huge barrage into Israel overnight. I believe over 200 rockets were fired. So is this an Israeli intelligence miscalculation? And how do you assess Israel will now respond on not one but 2 fronts, entering this war in southern Lebanon and also continuing its war in Iran?
Well, I think you're right 100%, Bianna, that Israelis felt that after the ceasefire with Hezbollah back in November of 2024, Hezbollah had been beaten. And Hezbollah, I don't want to say decimated, but was severely degraded and not capable of these types of barrages of rockets or this type of capability. I even went back earlier today and looked at Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's speech when the ceasefire went into effect. And he spoke about, we promised victory and here is the victory. But we look at what happened last night and we're looking at what's happening over the last few days. It doesn't seem like Israel was victorious over Hezbollah back when that ceasefire went into effect. And then we saw the continuous Israeli attacks in the year and a half since that ceasefire, but still, Hezbollah has significant capabilities. So I don't know if it was an intelligence lapse. I don't know if it was the Israeli government not being completely truthful necessarily in what were the capabilities that Hezbollah retained when that ceasefire did go into effect, but we see what they're capable of. If we listen to the IDF today, the Israel Defense Forces and the Chief of Staff, Eyal Zamir, is basically threatening a long-term campaign inside Lebanon, one that will, for once and for all, and that's the term that I'm hearing within the IDF, once and for all, we will finally remove this threat from the north. And I just want to say one last thing on that. The people of the north, the Israelis, who just went back to their homes in northern Israel, are now sitting in bomb shelters 24/7. There's rockets, there's drones, there's the threat of a potential Hezbollah commando invasion across the border. And for that reason, Israel has beefed up its forces in the north. These are people who deserve a different reality. And it is incumbent upon this government to finally try to create that new reality for those people.
I mean, I'm glad you brought that up because, it has been difficult for a lot of people in northern Israel. And it was almost traumatizing, beyond traumatizing for them to be evacuated from their homes for so long. And it was a massive, as I understand it, political crisis for the Netanyahu government dealing with that. And so that's a problem that Israel is having to contend with now. But just in terms of what's happening with Hezbollah and really the Lebanese government, because they are in sort of between a rock and a hard place in all of this. We saw the Lebanese president, Aoun, come out and talk about trying to sort of negotiate with Israel directly because they're so tired of consistently being dragged into conflict by Hezbollah. But it is very difficult for the Lebanese government to sort of extricate itself from Hezbollah, because Hezbollah is, of course, much more than just an armed group. They're a political system. They offer sort of social and welfare services. The Lebanese military is politically constrained, and it's sort of hesitant, of course, for understandable reasons, to sort of engage with Hezbollah directly. The Lebanese political system itself is weak and unstable. So if you are Joseph Aoun, what are your options?
Well, I think Joseph Aoun has a significant dilemma, but I think also Israel does, because you're 100% right, Zain, that we are facing a moment in time that on the one hand, Hezbollah has to be dealt with. But on the other side of this, Israel is looking at a government in Beirut, led by Joseph Aoun, with people in parliament. And they were supposed to hold elections just in May, new parliamentary elections. And it's fascinating to watch. The candidates, now those elections have been postponed, but the candidates in those elections are, each one is trying to outflank the other, who can be tougher in the rhetoric to dismantle, to disarm, and to free their country of Hezbollah. So on the one hand, you want to take down Hezbollah, but on the other hand, Israel doesn't want to undermine this government. This is an amazing government that has real potential to even normalize diplomatic relations one day with Israel. That's even a conversation that's being had right now as we speak inside Beirut. So Israel has to be careful. I think what we would want to see in Israel is the Aoun government take real steps to trying to take on Hezbollah. At the end of the day, it is up to the Lebanese government to want to take that fight. They don't want to. And therefore, Israel is at some point going to be constrained, because if the Lebanese aren't going to do it on their own with the LAF, with the Lebanese armed forces, it's going to have to be the IDF. And the consequences of that are not going to be to the liking of either side here, right? The Lebanese are going to claim that Israel is undermining their sovereignty. And the world is not going to want to see Israel going into Lebanon in a ground offensive like what we saw just about a year and a half ago. So if either they take the action themselves, or I'm afraid Israel's going to have to do the work on its own.
Yeah, and this comes as not only you're seeing more and more outrage, not only from the Lebanese government, but Lebanese people and the community there itself saying we did not ask for this war again, and very, very frustrated and angry at Hezbollah for starting this. You've got pressure inside Israel as well, though, because if you're going to see hundreds of thousands, perhaps 100,000 or so troops then drawn into another front, this is an ongoing war for Israel that at some point, it's not only the human cost, but also the cost to the economy, and as Israel said, as Zain said, the psychology and the psychological toll that this is having now on these two countries collectively. Yaakov Katz, we'll have to leave it there. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Yaakov.
Thank you.
And as we said, we've seen a fresh wave of strikes in the Lebanese capital and new Israeli evacuation orders in the last half hour or so. So let's go straight to our chief international security correspondent, Nick Payton-Walsh, who is tracking all of the developments live from Amman, Jordan. And Nick, this speaks to the point that we were just making with Yaakov. It puts the Lebanese government in a very difficult position. They have been more aggressive than ever in their demands for Hezbollah to disarm. And yet now it's the Lebanese people and obviously those Israeli residents that are facing the brunt of this renewed fighting.
Indeed, and important to point out to people exactly how central we're talking about with these two recent evacuation orders. I mean, a matter of 100 meters away from key government prime ministerial offices in the very heart of Beirut, the last one I just saw, and then slightly out east further too, still closer towards the Ashafir, kind of a northeastern part of the city. I point that out because traditionally the Hezbollah stronghold of southern Beirut has been the Israeli target in the last offensive back in 2024, and evacuation orders too. So this shows a spreading series of Israeli ambitions to hit targets around the city. Also too important to point out that we are hearing now a second evacuation order for southern Beirut, telling people to get north of the Zahrani River. Now that's about 20 kilometers further north. That's potentially tens, maybe hundreds of thousands of people, some of whom fled the first evacuation order south of the Litani to keep moving further north. So the humanitarian toll of this enormous, and it's important to point out that this may erode some of the momentum that the anti-Hezbollah feeling was getting in Lebanese society. Not to suggest that Hezbollah will somehow benefit from it, but to see this sort of onslaught and this sort of displacement, forced evacuation of people from huge areas is not going to play well in Lebanese society, and it may potentially provide a window for unity against this Israeli onslaught, where in the past it seemed as though Hezbollah was certainly on a back foot in terms of the Lebanese military's move to try and disarm them. So a key moment certainly in this conflict, one in which there are hundreds of thousands of people on the move. And I should point out, 8 people were killed in a strike on a beach just slightly north of the evacuation zone in southern Beirut there, and that was, I think, a startling sign of how some of these Israeli strikes can spread somewhat to areas where this seems to have been predominantly people who'd evacuated from these orders.
All right, Nick Payton-Walsh for us. Thank you so much. Well, Israel has raised the specter of a major ground operation in Lebanon amid an intensifying conflict with Hezbollah.
Yeah, CNN's Isabel Young reports from Beirut and has more now on the toll this war has taken so far in that country.
Well, it's a heavy night of bombardment here in Lebanon. You can see the smoke behind me. You can really smell the smoke in the air as well. And we've been hearing jets overhead. This happened as Hezbollah sent a barrage of rockets into Israeli territory. And Israel responded by sending airstrikes, initially about half a dozen airstrikes, and these are some of the heaviest airstrikes that residents say that they've heard and seen so far. The IDF has also warned individuals in Dahia and in the southern suburbs to evacuate immediately and not to return. As we've been moving around Beirut today, we've really seen this whole city has been, turned upside down just in the last few days. Hundreds of thousands of people have been displaced over the last week or so. So many people have just had their entire lives turned upside down. We've seen people out in the streets, sleeping in tents, sleeping in shelters, in schools, in a sports stadium, literally wherever they can find space today. And we've heard them saying that, for many of them, this is not the first time that they've been displaced. Many of them were displaced 16 months ago, and now they're absolutely exhausted to be going through this all over again. Isabel Young, CNN, Beirut.
All right, the lack of clarity from the White House over the U.S. military's mission in Iran is presenting a political problem for President Trump and his Republican Party, especially as oil and gas prices surge.
Sources tell CNN that Trump allies are pushing Trump's administration to offer a clearer picture on the goals of the war and the metrics for its success to the American public, who largely disapprove of military action in Iran. On Wednesday, a top Republican echoed some of those sentiments in rare public remarks, noting that the White House is conveying a level of uncertainty that is causing confusion.
The president says we're almost done, and then we hear from others that, well, it's going to be weeks, maybe months, that the level of fighting is going down, and yet then the next day it seems like the intensity of the strikes is even more than it has been. So I think this is where the American public is following this with a bit of confusion. If you haven't built the case as to why we need to be doing more, it may be a challenge to get the support that you need.
In other developments, pro-Iran hackers have claimed responsibility for a cyber attack on a major U.S. medical device maker.
Yeah, the Stryker company, which produces a range of hospital equipment, told CNN it has experienced a global network disruption. Let's bring in Sean Lingus, who broke the story for us and joins us live now from Washington. So, Sean, the hacking group actually claimed that the attack on Stryker was in response to the attack we saw on the elementary school in Iran. But this is really the sort of first major attack from a pro-Iranian group on U.S. infrastructure. And I guess the expectation is there could be more where that came from.
There could be. There certainly could be. We were waiting for this. Those of us who report on this, U.S. intelligence officials were warning about this. There was some questions about to what extent the Iranian cyber operatives in Tehran were still alive and well, given all of the bombardments that they experienced in the last a week or so. But what we saw yesterday break overnight was the just sort of disruption at global scale of a massive company based in Michigan. It has about 56,000 employees, but they make hospital equipment for hospitals across the U.S. And we're still trying to run down exactly what impacts we have. But just one impact, for example, is the device that ambulances use to communicate patient information to hospitals. That was taken offline because of the cyber attack. So now paramedics use radio, as they can do, to communicate that information. But it's really an alarming cyber attack. The health sector is convening calls almost hourly about this. The FBI is certainly investigating. Iran, we knew Iran was capable of this, and it was frankly a matter of time before it happened. Yes, they did cite the the bombing of the elementary school in Iran as justification. But truth be told, they would have probably tried to carry out a cyber attack no matter what. And this company appears to be the unfortunate, opportunistic victim of that.
All right, welcome back to One World. I'm Bianca Golodriga.
And I'm Zain Asher. Several Gulf countries have intercepted new waves of Iranian drones and missiles. Iran has been escalating its attack on vessels in the Strait of Hormuz. In just 2 days, 6 ships have been attacked. According to a new message said to be from the Iranian supreme leader, Iran intends to keep this key shipping route closed.
Meantime, Saudi Arabia's defense ministry says that it has intercepted and destroyed more than 20 drones near the kingdom's oil fields. And take a look at this video from Bahrain. Firefighters battling huge flames at a fuel storage facility allegedly struck by Iran. As for the UAE, their air defenses are also responding to incoming Iranian threats. CNN senior producer Bijan Hosseini is tracking the story from the Qatari capital of Doha. And so here we are, Bijani, 12 days in the attacks against other Gulf nations continue, despite the fact that the new supreme leader has said that they will not be striking their, as he described them, friendly neighbors, just U.S. bases and facilities there. How is that playing out in Doha?
Well, yeah, as you two pointed out, a lot of activity happening specifically today as this conflict continues to escalate throughout the whole region. Starting today, Iran focusing a lot of that firepower on energy infrastructure, contrary to what the country has said. We saw that video in Bahrain, a massive fire that broke out after authorities there said an Iranian drone attacked a fuel storage tank. We know that civil defense have been battling that fire for hours. We also know that authorities telling residents in 4 nearby towns and villages to stay inside and keep their windows shut, which suggests a potential environmental fallout from that attack as well. Over in Oman, a similar story near the port of Salalah, another fuel tanker. This video was geolocated by CNN. It purports to show an Iranian Shahed drone hitting that facility. Iran did come out and say that Oman is a friendly neighbor. They found that this attack was highly suspicious, is what they said, and that they would investigate that attack. But we're also seeing attacks in and around the Strait of Hormuz. We know that 2 foreign oil tankers off the coast of Iraq and Iraqi waters were attacked today. Those attacks killed at least 1 person, and we know that dozens of crew members had to abandon ship on those 2 vessels. And as you guys pointed out, we're seeing attacks in multiple Gulf countries as well on land. Saudi's Ministry of Defense confirming 20 drones were intercepted in the eastern part of their country. Over in the UAE, Ministry of Defense there confirming that they were intercepting missiles and drones. We know that 1 drone fell and hit a residential building in Dubai's Creek Harbor, according to the government media office there. And in Kuwait, several drones hitting the airport there. Authorities saying there was material damage from those strikes. And we also heard from our colleague Nick Robertson that 2 people were injured in an overnight drone strike on a residential building there. Here in Qatar, we had alerts again today on our phone, the Ministry of Defense confirming that they intercepted a missile attack from Iran. So clearly no sign of slowing down here in the region.
Israel's defense minister has instructed the military to prepare for expanding operations in Lebanon. This after Hezbollah fired rockets at Israel. I want to bring in CNN's Jeremy Diamond. He's live from Haniel in central Israel, which, as I understand it, Jeremy, was hit in a barrage of strikes last night.
Yeah, that's exactly right, Becky. We saw last night the largest barrage of rockets being fired by Hezbollah in a single instance since this war began. More than 100 rockets were fired from Lebanon towards communities in northern and central Israel. And this home right behind me took a direct impact from one of those rockets. You can see the state in which the living room is currently. There is glass shattered all over the floor. I've been inside this home, and of the walls that are still standing, they are all pockmarked with shrapnel throughout. This is the part of the home that took the brunt of the impact, though, and you can see the concrete here that's been broken down. There are bits of concrete still lying on the floor as well. But this is where the rocket actually landed. You can see the size of the crater here, Becky. I'll stand next to it so you can have a little bit of a sense of scale. What's particularly notable is that Israel, of course, was striking Hezbollah for more than a year in Lebanon, and yet we are 60 miles away from the Lebanese border, and Hezbollah still has rockets that can reach an area like this and make a direct impact, not only on the home that I just showed you, but also this home here that you can see is also pockmarked with shrapnel. Now, inside this first home, there was an 86-year-old woman with her caretaker, but they were inside the home's bomb shelter, which is completely unscathed, and so are they, of course, shaken by the power of that blast. What we've also been witnessing, of course, are these ballistic missile attacks from Iran. And increasingly, Becky, we've discovered that Iran is firing new types of munitions at Israel. These are cluster munitions, and they're aimed at trying to get through Israel's sophisticated air defense. Watch.
Their orange glow streaks across the night sky. Each speck of light, a small bomb, carrying up to 11 pounds of explosives and raining down indiscriminately, sometimes in densely populated areas. They are cluster munitions, and Iran is increasingly packing the heads of its ballistic missiles with dozens of them, aiming to pierce Israel's sophisticated air defenses.
One of those small bombs struck the roof of this residential building, and you can see the hole is only a few inches wide. And yet this is the kind of destruction that just one of those small bombs can cause, one of multiple impact points from a single missile.
We confirmed 9 separate impacts from that one missile. They include this strike on a Tel Aviv car wash that severely wounded one man, and another in a neighboring suburb. The impacts are spread out across 7 miles of mostly residential neighborhoods, illustrating why using these munitions in populated areas violates international law. The next day, another cluster missile attack sends bomblets tumbling south of Tel Aviv. At least 5 impacts scattered across 8 miles. One bomb hit a street here. Nearby, 2 construction workers were killed. The first fatalities in Israel caused by these weapons. Israel's military, which has itself deployed cluster munitions in other wars, says about half of Iran's missile attacks use these munitions. Vehicles overturned, shrapnel slicing through anything near the impact. Iran's missiles are more destructive when equipped with a single large warhead, but the clusters are much tougher to intercept.
It's a mechanism to bypass active missile defense. In some cases, you can hit the target with an arrow or with a THAAD missile, for example, but the bomblets will continue and will get to the target.
The Israeli military does try and intercept these bomblets, expending a costly and finite quantity of interceptors in the process.
So if there is a strategy here by Iran, that could be it, to try and deplete Israel's air defenses, right?
We know it. I think Iran doesn't have the capability at the moment of orchestrating a large barrage of ballistic missiles. So if Iran wants to cause a lot of damage, even with a small number of ballistic missiles, then submunition missiles, with bomblets will be the weapon of choice.
The weapon of choice as Iran pursues a war of attrition, one missile at a time.
And Becky, we did reach out to the Iranian government for comment on its use of these cluster munitions. They did not respond. But what's so fascinating as we're watching not only what's happening here, but also in the Gulf, is this kind of war of attrition that seems to be developing. And that seems to be Iran's aim here, to use these kind of various asymmetrical warfare tactics where even as they are getting pummeled by Israeli and American strikes, they're still finding ways to cause damage, whether it is here with, one missile at a time that is sending millions fleeing into shelters, causing Israel to use these costly interceptor missiles as well, or whether it's in the Gulf, where we're watching as its shutdown of the Strait of Hormuz is causing oil prices to skyrocket. This all seems to be part of one strategy by Iran. Becky?
It's good to have you, Jeremy. Thank you very much indeed. Just before 4:30 in the afternoon there, just before 6:30 here. I want to get you to Lebanon and get a sense of the toll that the war has taken there. This report from Isabel Jung comes from Beirut.
Night of heavy bombardment here in Beirut. We've heard some very loud explosions in the middle of the night. This started because yesterday Hezbollah fired a barrage of rockets towards Israeli territory, and Israel has hit back hard with an initial round of airstrikes that was about half a dozen. Some of the residents that we spoke to said that this was the loudest and the worst that they've seen and heard so far. And also a targeted strike in Beirut that killed 8 people, wounded a further 31, although those figures could continue to rise. And obviously this is having a profound impact on civilians. The IDF have warned residents living in the neighbourhood of Dahya to evacuate and not to return anytime soon. And so we've got thousands, hundreds of thousands of people who have suddenly been displaced, living in tents across the city, living in makeshift shelters, in schools, in sports stadiums, really anywhere, and just desperate to know when this conflict is going to end.
Well, an update there from Izzy on the displaced, the casualties in the almost 2 weeks of Israeli attacks. The information minister says nearly 700 people have been killed, among them more than a dozen medics and rescuers, and nearly 100 kids and 98 children. The conflict taking its toll on the Lebanese people on day 13 of this war.
We are against the escalation. We don't want war. We want peace. We want our children to live in this country and secure their future in this country so they can live. War leads nowhere except to destruction, devastation, and death. We don't want war. We want peace. Let them find a solution already and end this, because people are exhausted and worn out.
Well, Othman Belbezi is the Middle East and Africa Director for the International Organization for Migration. That's the IOM, which is a humanitarian group. He is there in Beirut. Firstly, just as a sort of first-hand observation, just tell us, you've been speaking to a lot of people who have been displaced. I know not just in Beirut, but in Tripoli, for example, as well. How are people doing?
Yeah, thank you very much for this opportunity. As you have seen, the numbers are rising significantly by the day, and we are almost hitting the number of 1 million, maybe in 2-3 coming days, if this rate continue. People are feeling a lot of stress, feeling that it's different than previous, I would say, conflicts they've been in. This is, I believe, maybe the largest or the first time as a large area is covered by evacuation orders. People have to flee their homes, but also they are seeking refuge in areas that are also affected by other conflicts. For example, when we were in Tripoli, we realized that many buildings in Tripoli had collapsed lately. And that's why they already have internal displacement within the cities, and they are still hosting displaced people from other regions. The numbers are increasing, the number of casualties.
And also this morning's strike on Beirut, sorry, I was just going to, just to pick you up there. I mean, this morning's strike on the Beirut seafront, killing several internally displaced people who one has to assume have come from southern Beirut suburbs down onto that area to seek some refuge. I mean, what sort of heightened risk do people face now that they are being forced out of their homes?
So exactly, first, people are feeling that nowhere is safe, because even though they fled the areas affected by the evacuation order, they still are being targeted in different areas. And this is definitely unacceptable. So civilians should not be a target. On the other hand, people are trying to seek refuge in shelters. We know that there are around 590 shelters, but this hosts almost 1/5 of the total number of displaced. So the rest either had to seek refuge with families or find by their own means, pay for their shelter. And this is not sustainable. And also, we are seeing many people on the streets in downtown Beirut. Yesterday, we had a walk with the team, just going to see people. The situation is dire. People are out in the cold with nothing. They fled homes with nothing, only with their clothes. Many left their papers. We visited the Ministry of Health. They are distributing medicine. Many people even fled without their medication. They just ran for their lives.
So Israel's defense minister, Israel Katz, has instructed the military at least to prepare for expanding operations in Lebanon. You're there in Beirut. What are you and others bracing for in the coming hours and days?
Honestly, if I want to talk about people we are meeting, there is a lot of fear, there is a lot of anxiety. The options are limited. Also, the option of moving out of the country or cross-border is no longer there. So people have to seek refuge in different parts of the country with the limited means. Lebanon has been under a difficult economic situation, so we saw a decline in the revenues from agriculture, tourism, many loss of jobs. And honestly, the options are very limited. So any, I would say, escalation will result in catastrophic consequences.
Othman, well, more on our breaking news, day 13 of the war in Iran and its repercussions around the Middle East. Kuwait says its international airport was damaged in a drone attack early on Thursday. It was reported shortly after Iran launched a wave of retaliatory strikes aimed at energy infrastructure in the Gulf. Nick Robertson is in Kuwait outside a residential building that was also damaged.
Yeah, just take a look at the apartment above me here, residential building, that completely ripped apart, blown out, debris strewn on the ground around here. I can see a shoe over there, twisted metal over here. 2 people were injured here, 2 civilians, Kuwaiti government officials tell us, were injured here. They've been taken away for treatment. There were multiple rounds of attempted attacks and attacks on Kuwait overnight. The sirens going off, defensive fighter jets put up in the air overnight. But I want to tell you something here that I think gives our viewers a real clue to how much of a threat Iran is and how their attacks are working. So you see that impact behind me, spin around here, and what are we looking at here? We're looking at the Persian Gulf. Iran is 50 miles behind me across the water there. So that drone flew in from there straight into the building here. Couple of 100 miles that way is the Strait of Hormuz. Just further north from here, closer to Iraq, 2 tankers, oil tankers, hit by an explosive device last night, both set on fire. So right in the northern end of the Persian Gulf here now, you have Iran attacking oil tankers here, a few hundred miles to the south, trying to choke off the Strait of Hormuz. They are putting this whole region into sort of an economic chokehold. The Iranians are turning the sea here, the water, the Persian Gulf, effectively into a war zone, not just the buildings around here. Kuwait as well last night. We'll just spin back so you can again see the damage here. But Kuwait last night during those attacks, power lines came down, and the attack that happened just a few hours ago in Kuwait, targeting and hit Kuwait's international airport. Structural damage, we're told, no one injured. But that threat coming straight across from Iran, very close, very real.
Hello, everyone. Live from New York, I'm Bianca Goladrigo.
And I'm Zain Asher. You are watching One World. A defiant message released on Iranian state television, said to be from the new Supreme Leader, Mojtaba Khamenei. The message was read by a television presenter. I want you to listen to what the presenter said, that he said.
I gave this assurance to people that we will not forget. We will revenge on the blood of your martyrs. This revenge is not only for our martyred leader, it's actually for those who are martyred by the enemy. We will take a full revenge.
Khamenei also warns the Strait of Hormuz, a key shipping route, will remain closed as Iran ramps up attacks on vessels in the key waterway. In just 2 days, 6 ships have been attacked. Right now, the global oil market is dealing with what the International Energy Agency calls the largest supply disruption in its history. US President Trump downplaying the rise in oil prices.
Yeah, meantime, sources briefed on the initial findings of a U.S. military probe into a deadly school attack in Iran say that the U.S. military may have accidentally struck the school based on outdated intelligence. And in Lebanon, nearly 700 people have been killed and hundreds of thousands displaced as Israel's defense minister has instructed the military to prepare for expanded operations there. This after Iran-backed Hezbollah fired a barrage of rockets at Israel. Israel. Let's go straight to our chief international security correspondent, Nick Payton-Walsh, who was tracking all of these developments live from Amman, Jordan. And Nick, last night we saw Israel inundated with hundreds of missiles that had been sent from Hezbollah. I believe as many as 200. A number of them had been intercepted. Thankfully, no casualties as a result. But here you now have the IDF saying that they may be preparing for a larger scale response, perhaps even a ground invasion into southern Lebanon. Just talk to us about the latest and the implications that has now on two fronts.
Yeah, Hezbollah last night clear to launch a ferociously large enough barrage to potentially suggest they have more fight in them than we've maybe seen over the past 10 days since they joined the war to avenge the death of ultimately their sponsor, Iranian Supreme Leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei. As you rightly pointed out, most of those intercepted. The Israeli response pretty immediate and ferocious against the Dahia suburbs of southern Beirut. There were 8 individuals killed in a strike on a beach nearby there, and huge devastation shown in the blasts that occurred across that whole region. Now, on top of that, the IDF have issued a quite remarkable evacuation order, essentially telling people to get out of everywhere south of the Zahrani River. Now, the Litani River, below that about 20 kilometers, was where the previous forced evacuation zone was declared. This is something new and something bigger. And remember, each time a new area is declared as needing to be evacuated, that means hundreds of thousands of people are potentially on the move. And so we might actually be looking at people who fled the Litani evacuation zone to the area below the Zahrani River now having to move for a second time. Many indeed fled to Beirut and then found southern Beirut, increasingly large parts of it being under evacuation orders too. And in fact, we've also just heard that a building not far indeed from the central part where the government is based in Beirut is also under an evacuation order. So the initial signs are clearly that we should expect a further Israeli bombardment of those areas too. But there are also signs potentially that the Israelis may be moving from the limited targeted raids on the ground that they've been performing over the last week or so. They went from saying there were 2 to plural a couple of days ago now to something potentially bigger. Nobody, I think, at this point has openly said a ground invasion is imminent. And when we were up there in northern Israel 4 days ago, there weren't enough publicly visible troops to see that. But that's clearly something that may well be an issue, particularly given the sustained ability for Hezbollah to harass northern Israel. And it seems at times Tel Aviv as well, with some of their rockets. Back to you.
Nick, we did get a statement from the new Supreme Leader, and what was interesting is that it was read aloud on state television by a presenter. We know that the Supreme Leader was injured in that February 28th attack. We don't know necessarily for sure the extent of the injuries, but for the fact that we did not see his face, Nick, and we didn't even hear his voice, what can we glean from that?
I mean, it's possible to read too much into it, possibly. You might have to take into account the security concerns of those around Mujtaba Khamenei. It doesn't provide evidence that he's incapacitated or heavily injured, but it's a very odd decision to make, because ultimately the noise had been gathering around exactly his condition, his state of health. There were very open reports about him being injured in likely the same attack that killed his father. And so the question really reverberated as to when are we going to get a proof of life or a proof of health, that the man on top of this theocratic regime is alive and well and functioning. Instead, a remarkable decision ultimately was made. It may just be security, it may be practicality, it may be because Mujtaba Khamenei has always been out of the public eye. But his job is very different now, and his job today ultimately was to say to the Trump White House, I'm alive and well, providing somebody, potentially, they might open backdoor talks with, or at least for them to know that there is somebody fully well in charge. Instead, we had a written statement that State TV said was his handwriting, odd thing to suggest, read out by the anchor, female, on duty at that particular point. And that leaves, I think, many more questions than it provided necessarily answers. The content of the speech, I think we can break down into 3 key parts of maybe policy here. The Straits of Hormuz will remain closed. There was an element of leverage on that to Gulf nations and neighbors of Iran to say, close those American bases. And you might see us open the Straits of Hormuz, and again reminding them, somewhat, falsely, frankly, that all the targeting we've seen across targets across the Gulf nation was essentially aimed at the American American bases there as well. They also called for reparations for Iran for indeed what has happened, and also at the same time Mujtaba Khamenei said that Iran will be looking to seek surprise, potentially soft targets maybe, to catch the United States off guard. Outside of that, memory of his father, of his dead wife and sister evoked, and at times clerical language from a man whose clerical history, like his father, sort of not entirely the full-fledged nation you might expect from the predecessor, the first Ayatollah Khamenei, but still an interesting moment where I think many were looking to the Iranian regime to provide full-throated proof of their supreme leader's health and functionality, and instead we got this.
All right, Nick Pate-Walsh reporting live from Amman, Jordan. Thank you.
Thanks, Nick. All right, we are learning a little bit more about an airstrike on an elementary school in Iran that killed dozens of people, mostly children, on the first day of the war.
Sources briefed on the preliminary findings of an ongoing military investigation say the U.S. military likely hit the school in Minab due to outdated intelligence about a nearby naval base.
Yeah, Iran state media says at least 168 children and 14 teachers were killed in that February 28th strike. CNN's Zachary Cohen joins us live now from Washington, D.C. So, Zachary, what we're understanding is that the U.S. military had outdated intelligence because this elementary school was apparently once part of an Iranian naval base, but satellite images show that it was actually fenced off from this naval base about a decade ago. So just explain why this information wasn't double-checked. How could this mistake have been made when it has been at least 10 years that this school had been separated from that naval base?
Yeah, guys, I think there's two questions that this investigation is looking at. It's the what happened, and as far as even the early returns are consistent with what I think had become increasingly obvious as evidence started to emerge publicly over the last few days, that the U.S. military launched the Tomahawk missile that hit this school and killed nearly 200 people. And I think that's something that is still the White House and the Pentagon have not really been forthcoming in acknowledging, but that the evidence that has been displayed publicly so far very strongly points in that direction for a multitude of reasons. Now, on the question of how this happened, the investigation does seem to be leaning into this idea that it was at least contributed to by outdated intelligence provided by the Defense Intelligence Agency, which is really responsible for creating and updating target lists for the U.S. military really around the world. And I've been told multiple times by multiple sources that this target list and the intelligence that underpins it is consistently updated. And so it begs the question, we know from as far back as 2013, based on commercial satellite imagery, that these do seem to be two distinct facilities. You have the IRGC naval base that it appears to have been the intended target of these strikes, that is separated by a fence is separating it from a separate facility that appears to be this school. And that's reinforced by imagery as recent as December of 2025, where it's clear that there are dozens of people that appear to be playing in the courtyard of the school. So clearly, overhead satellite imagery seems to suggest that these were two very distinct locations. Obviously, this Pentagon investigation that remains ongoing seems to have determined that the outdated intelligence did not reflect that. Now, obviously, President Donald Trump has even suggested that erroneously that Iran may have been responsible for the strike, even though Iran doesn't have Tomahawk missiles. But take a listen to what he has said over the last few days.
Based on what I've seen, that was done by Iran. We think it was done by Iran. Because they're very inaccurate, as you know, with their munitions. They have no accuracy whatsoever. It was done by Iran. I will say that the Tomahawk, which is one of the most powerful weapons around, is used by, is sold and used by other countries. Numerous other nations have Tomahawks. They buy them from us. But I will certainly, whatever the report shows, I'm willing to live with that report.
So Trump is alone in claiming that Iran may have been responsible. The rest of his senior officials have said that they're going to let the investigation play out. Trump did commit to acknowledging and accepting the findings of that investigation.
We've been in breaking coverage all hour with the very latest, what the supreme leader in Iran has just said in his sort of first statement, let's call it that. CNN's Oren Liebman joining us now live from Tel Aviv. Oren, what did you make of what we heard out of Tehran? We certainly didn't see the new supreme leader, didn't even hear his voice at this stage, but we heard a statement read out on state TV.
Well, I think from Israel's perspective, Mujtaba Khamenei remains a target. That was true in the strike that likely injured him, according to his legs, some of the reports we've seen, and he will continue to be a target. Israel's political leadership has made that clear. This is, for them, a continuation of the Ayatollah that they absolutely opposed, and that's part of the reason behind this war, was to topple the Ayatollah's regime. So he remains a target. We have seen, and the Gulf has certainly learned, the asymmetrical warfare that Iran is able to carry out. Israel isn't nearly as concerned about that because the incoming ballistic missiles, even those with the cluster warheads, are largely intercepted. Yes, certainly some of them have gotten through, but from Israel's perspective, this war is still on, it is still hot, and whether Mujtaba Khamenei is seen or heard or not seen or heard, he remains very much a target for Israel.
Oren, I just want to read out a tweet by Ali Larijani, who is the chief of the of national security. Trump has said, quote, "We can take apart Iran's electric capacity within 1 hour, but we have not done it." And he said, and I quote here, and let's bring this up on the screen, "Well, if they do that, the whole region will go dark in less than half an hour, and darkness provides ample opportunity to hunt down US servicemen running for safety." I just wanted to alert our viewers to that in this sort of back and forth between the US president and oftentimes Ali Larijani holding nothing back in his response very specifically to posts that the US president makes. And as we consider that and consider what we have just heard, at least dictated by a presenter on state media from the new supreme leader in Iran. Oren, I do want to understand what we know about this call for expanding operations in Lebanon.
This appears to be very much the growing specter of a large-scale Israeli ground operation, perhaps a ground invasion into Lebanon. The question not if, but when, and that's becoming increasingly apparent from the statements we're seeing from Israel's leadership. After there was a large barrage from Hezbollah, the Iran-backed proxy in Lebanon, fired into northern and central Israel last night, Israel's defense minister Israel Katz said today that it had been on the Lebanese government to disarm Hezbollah according to the ceasefire agreement of 2024, but Israel has never had any faith that they had the ability to do that. So Katz said, "We will take the territory and do it ourselves." We have already seen Israeli ground forces push farther into Lebanon, still just a couple of kilometers within the border, but they have seized more territory, conducted ground raids and commando raids, but they have called up more than 100,000 reservists and just deployed an additional brigade to the north. So this very much seems to raise the possibility, what looks like an increasing possibility, of a major Israeli ground op into Lebanon to try to deal with Hezbollah, as Hezbollah has shown that it can keep firing and it can very much keep fighting.
And just briefly, I've got about 60 seconds. Just tell us about the attacks in Israel that prompted these airstrikes in Lebanon, the most recent airstrikes in Lebanon.
This is by far the largest barrage we have seen, certainly since the start of the war 13 days ago, but it's the largest barrage we've seen from Hezbollah in well over a year. According to the Israeli military, more than 200 rockets and drones. One had a direct hit or hit right near a building in central Israel, not northern Israel. So Hezbollah retains power. They can keep fighting back. And just as Israel has been preparing for a major op, it seems so has Hezbollah, which is why that conflict is intensifying, even if most of the world is looking at Iran in the Gulf.
And good evening and welcome to this special edition of Out Front, the War with Iran. I'm Erin Burnett tonight in Tel Aviv. And breaking news just coming into CNN. We'll show you the video. 2 oil tankers are on fire right now in the Persian Gulf off the coast of Iraq. 25 crew members had to be rescued from 2 vessels, according to the Director General of the Iraqi Ports Company. Now, from these videos, which are absolutely stunning, you can see the oil, it appears to be on fire in the water, the likely result of an oil spill as Trump has just declared victory in this war. Here he is.
We've won. Let me tell you, we've won. You know, you never like to say too early you won. We won. We won the bet. In the first hour, it was over.
Well, here we are entering the 12th day, and on the ground here, I'll show you what we just saw in the skies over Tel Aviv from where we are. Explosions crossing the sky, interceptors going out, and you can hear sirens in the distance. Those sirens were actually not immediately where we were, but you can see what we just witnessed. And there were no early warning sirens where we were when this happened. That's unusual. Israel tonight is bracing, though, for a major attack overnight. Sources telling us that they are expecting a quote-unquote significant expansion of attacks from both Iran and Hezbollah. And we are also seeing this incredible video out of northern Israel tonight, north of where we are, where you see a barrage of rockets coming in from Lebanon in the skies there. And sources now say that Iran's biggest proxy, the Houthis in Yemen, could launch their first attacks on Israel of this conflict as well. Also, far from the U.S. winning, tonight we are seeing a major escalation of tensions in the Strait of Hormuz. And I just showed you those images we have just confirmed of an oil tanker on fire off Basra, that major Iraqi port. 3 ships we also understand today attacked in the crucial shipping route of Hormuz today, according to the UK Maritime Trade Operations. That is the authority on maritime security. And we'll show you here, it's a Thai-flagged ship that was struck, totally engulfed in black smoke. 3 crew members missing tonight. That crew forced to evacuate on lifeboats, according to Thai officials. And Iran is warning of more attacks. This is pretty stunning to imagine that even 2 weeks ago, if we saw images like this, what world we would think we would be living in. Senior IRGC commander, meantime, tonight is claiming that, and I quote, "We have missiles that are launched from underwater. We may use them in the coming days." This comes as we are learning the preliminary findings of the U.S. military's investigation into the strike on a girls' school in southern Iran has found the United States is to blame for that terrible, horrific tragedy. Sources are telling CNN that the military likely used outdated information about a nearby naval base and accidentally then hit the school, causing the single deadliest attack of this conflict so far, in which it was children who were killed, 168 children and 14 teachers, according to Iranian state media. President Trump, who previously tried to blame Iran for the attack, is claiming tonight that he is unaware of the military's findings.
A new report says the military investigation has found it was the United States that struck the school.
I don't know about it.
And tonight, the mystery around Iran's new supreme leader is deepening. He has still not been seen in public 3 days after being named supreme leader. A source is now telling CNN that he was injured, but they are describing it as fairly minor, a foot fracture, bruising around his eye, and minor lacerations to his face. I describe those as minor because obviously in that strike, his father, mother, wife, and son were killed. There are major questions, therefore, about the full extent of his injuries, as we know multiple members of his family were killed, and that's according to Iranian state media. There's also real questions, of course, about the depth of these injuries and why, if they are so minor, we have not yet seen him. We have a team of reporters standing by for us. Kristen Holmes with new reporting at the White House. Nick Payton-Walsh is in Amman, Jordan. Jeremy Diamond is here with me in Tel Aviv, and Will Ripley is in Taiwan, now front and center, where there are major questions about China's potential involvement now in this conflict. I want to begin, though, with Kristen Holmes. She's at the White House. And Kristen, President Trump making that bold declaration tonight, and that is incredibly bold. It's not just that they won. He's saying that the United States won in the first hour. It certainly does not appear to reflect the reality that anybody here is seeing on the ground.
Well, and of course, Aaron, I would go back to that first hour when the Gulf countries were getting completely pummeled. And I imagine they did not think that anyone had won at that time. And as President Trump is kind of doubling down on this narrative that the U.S. won, they won in the first hour, he's also continuing to reiterate this idea that only he can decide when the war is over. So both saying that he won, but also not declaring that the war is over. And in saying that like that, he clearly is not taking into account that there are multiple parties involved in this war. It does does not appear that Iran thinks that this war is over. It does not appear that Israel thinks that this war is over. All of these parties are going to continue to fight, even if President Trump says that he has decided that this is over, particularly because we know that they have not put out what metrics he will be using, what goals he will be using to declare that this war is over. So this is going to continue in the region, and all of this is happening as Republicans are seemingly desperate for any kind of new messaging from the White House on this war. When it comes to timeline, when it comes to the cost of oil, we've already started to see those oil prices surging. When it comes to the goals for the war, these are all things Republicans are going to the White House asking them to put out clearer messaging on, and we are told that the White House is intentionally not having the president or the administration box in themselves with any sort of actual timeline because they want these military operations to continue. So even though the Republicans are asking for it, they are not getting it, and there are still going to be those questions as to what this will actually look like when President Trump declares that it's over, when there are so many other entities involved in this fight now.
Kristen, thank you very much at the White House tonight as we're looking at those burning tankers. I want to bring in now retired U.S. Navy Captain Lawrence Brennan. He was an officer on the USS Nimitz during the Iranian hostage crisis. He obviously knows this region and that strait very well. Seth Jones also here along with Kareem Sajapur. And welcome to all three of you. Captain, I want to start with you with the breaking news that we have. This new video we've just confirmed late tonight here in these overnight hours of an oil tanker on fire off the coast of Iraq. Near Basra, of course, major oil port. Obviously, these images are stunning. As I said 2 weeks ago, nobody could have ever thought such a thing would happen if this was in the context of a war. And you said that it would really have been unthinkable. And now here we are, and this is happening. That in Basra. Also, we saw those ships in the Strait today on fire. So, Captain, I guess just a simple question is, how could you imagine right now? You've been on the USS Nimitz sailing through the Strait of Hormuz.
That is true. A long time ago. It's a very difficult area, particularly for the United States Navy, and the Strait of Hormuz is an important choke point for international trade, particularly oil. This is going to have a tremendous impact, and unfortunately a negative impact, both on the oil prices and the environmental costs are going to be catastrophic. Burning the oil is one thing, but the pollution that's going to be caused can be devastating for years. And this is going to basically stop international traffic through the Strait of Hormuz for the foreseeable future.
Which is really stunning. And I mean, just to think about it, I was talking to someone who has tankers in there now. I mean, essentially those ships are waiting. And right now it's a game of how long they can wait before they need to get restocked, whether they can get restocked even from the Emirates, turning transponders off to hide. I mean, it's truly incomprehensible. Seth, yeah, go ahead, Captain.
No, it's horrible. I mean, it's as bad as World War II when the U-boats were attacking American and British tankers in the Atlantic. And, if you've ever been on a ship that's had a fuel and oil fire, it's catastrophic. It's environmentally bad. It causes all sorts of damages. There's nothing worse than seeing someone who's been burned, particularly in oil and a fuel fire. And we had one on board Nimitz when I was there long time ago, and it's just that there's nothing worse than walking to sickbay and seeing people who are burned, and the scars and effective burns internally and externally are horrible.
More people and more suffering happening. I mean, Seth, the IRGC commander that I mentioned is now also threatening, right, these incredibly fast missiles that they say that travel underwater, technology from the Russians, ostensibly, but saying that they haven't used those yet, but they might in coming days. Do you see that threat, Seth, as real?
Aaron, I do think there is a continuing threat from Iranian missiles, cruise and ballistic missiles, and drones, and also a threat from some of Iran's partner forces, including the Houthis. I think it'd be very dangerous for U.S. ships to try to escort through the Strait of Hormuz right now until most of those missiles and drones have been destroyed, because, boy, the public information campaign that the Iranians would get hitting a U.S. Navy vessel in the Persian Gulf or the Strait of Hormuz would be a huge public relations victory for the Iranians.
So Karim, Trump was asked if he could declare victory in this war if the supreme leader remains the leader of remains the Ayatollah's son, right? A Khamenei replaces a Khamenei, and he responded, "I don't want to comment on that." I know, Karim, you have a new piece in The Atlantic that I hope everyone will read, and you've got all these new details on the new leader. So I guess, what have you learned about those around him? And I know you've got a specific theory as to why we haven't seen him yet.
So, Aaron, Mojtaba Khamenei has essentially spent his entire life in this very hardline ideological cocoon. The men around him are some of the most brutal men of the Islamic Republic, men like Hossein Taeb, Mohammed Baqir Ghalibaf. They are senior Revolutionary Guard commanders. Some of them have been deeply implicated in repression and torture, and he owes his throne to them. And so I don't see any signs that he's prepared to meaningfully change the character of the Islamic Republic. And I think this creates a dilemma for President Trump when he says that this war has been a victory. Obviously we've had great military success, but it's a political failure if you spend billions and billions of dollars replacing an 86-year-old leader with his 56-year-old son. And so I think that the president is going to have to be clear about what ultimately his objective is here, because if we've simply degraded them militarily, but we've given them a new lease on life, historians will see that as a strategic failure.
Captain Brennan, it is this regime, of course, that is keeping the Strait of Hormuz closed, and no sign that that will change. Can there be victory? I mean, in a sense, I'm asking a very obvious question, but can there be victory for the U.S., as the president has claimed, as long as Iran is keeping the Strait of Hormuz closed?
You can't have victory if you can't use the Strait of Hormuz. The Strait of Hormuz has to be reopened to international trade, and that is a difficult, if not impossible, thing to do under the present circumstances. I fear it's going to require a regime change and possibly an occupation of Iran. And I don't think anyone in their right mind wants to occupy Iran. It's just too dangerous a thing to do, too expensive, and too risky. So I don't think we have a short-term answer. And as much as I appreciate the president's optimism, declaring victory after the first day or two is just not the right thing to do. This is going to go on far longer than any of us hope.
Seth, in fact, he declared that he had achieved victory within 1 hour.
Yeah, Aaron, I mean, I think the reality is, and we've heard this from everybody here, is that, it's one thing if you're at World War II and you've got a formal surrender by the Germans and the Japanese, or even the end of the Balkan Wars, where there's the Dayton Accord that formally ends the war. There's going to be no end to this war. The Iranians aren't going to surrender. I think that's very clear right now. And as we've seen with the Israelis over the last several years in the West Bank and Gaza and Lebanon and even Yemen, that there's just mowing the grass. This persists against Iran and these partner forces. I don't see this as being any different right now.
And Karim, as we're understanding here, they're looking for a significant expansion in the attacks coming in here. And we did just see the sky light up with multiple interceptors just moments ago. And we'll see what happens in these next few hours. We understand Israel's in the midst of intense strikes in Tehran right now. And in that, we just have not heard from the supreme leader. And I'm curious, Karim, if his injuries are as minor as are now being reported. A source is telling CNN they're minor as well. The bruise, the cut face, maybe a broken foot, those sorts of types of injuries. If that's the case, from talking to your sources inside Iran, including people who have known Mojtaba Khamenei for decades, why have we not seen him?
You know, people who've known him many years describe him as kind of a meager presence. He has the kind of social skills of a dictator's son who's been coddled all his life. He doesn't have good interpersonal skills. He's not known to be a good speaker, a charismatic person. And so when you combine all of these elements together, he's eluding assassination, he's injured, he's in hiding, he's trying to lead a country which is at war with America, Israel, and much of his own population. And his injuries may be even to his face. I think that they're probably in a real dilemma to have this guy give his maiden speech and project confidence and strength when, at the moment he's anything but strong or confident.
Yeah, it's fascinating. And I guess if you see an injury, can that be portrayed as a survivor, or does that be perceived as weakness? And I guess it does depend what the extent of it. I thank you all very much. I really appreciate the conversation. And our breaking news coverage continues because we are getting some more new details just coming in on the tankers on fire right now in the Persian Gulf. Welcome back to a special edition of Outfront Live in Tel Aviv, the war with Iran. As we are here in Tel Aviv, we are following the breaking news. At least one person dead after 2 oil tankers were attacked, going up in flames in the Persian Gulf. We understand 38 crew members were rescued. Reuters is reporting that an initial investigation by Iraqi security officials found that explosive-laden Iranian boats hit the tankers. This comes as we are also learning tonight that Iran is now increasingly using cluster munitions, a very powerful and dangerous weapon on its missiles. Jeremy Diamond is here with me now. And Jeremy, you've been working on this piece as you've been observing this, but we started seeing it a few days ago, and it said these, in our skyline, started to look like cluster munitions. And then as you were observing and doing the research, you found out that there is new munition being used.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, we've been talking about this for days, looking at these images of these specks of light in the sky, wondering what these could be. And after speaking with experts, it's quite clear that Iran is indeed using these cluster munitions, and it does appear to be an effort to try and evade Israel's air defense systems.
Their orange glow streaks across the night sky. Each speck of light, a small bomb, carrying up to 11 pounds of explosives, and raining down indiscriminately, sometimes in densely populated areas. They are cluster munitions, and Iran is increasingly packing the heads of its ballistic missiles with dozens of them, aiming to pierce Israel's sophisticated air defenses.
One of those small bombs struck the roof of this residential building, and you can see the hole is only a few inches wide. And yet this is the kind of destruction that just one of those small bombs can cause, one of multiple impact points from a single missile.
We confirmed 9 separate impacts from that one missile. They include this strike on a Tel Aviv car wash that severely wounded 1 man and another in a neighboring suburb. The impacts are spread out across 7 miles of mostly residential neighborhoods, illustrating why using these munitions in populated areas violates international law. The next day, another cluster missile attack sends bomblets tumbling south of Tel Aviv. At least 5 impacts scattered across 8 miles. One bomb hit a street here. Nearby, 2 construction workers were killed, the first fatalities in Israel caused by these weapons. Israel's military, which has itself deployed cluster munitions in other wars, says about half of Iran's missile attacks use these munitions. Vehicles overturned, shrapnel slicing through anything near the impact. Iran's missiles are more destructive when equipped with a single large warhead, but the clusters are much tougher to intercept.
It's a mechanism to bypass active missile defense. In some cases, you can hit the target with an arrow or with a THAAD missile, for example, but the bomblets will continue and will get to the target.
The Israeli military does try and intercept these bomblets, expending a costly and finite quantity of interceptors in the process.
So if there is a strategy here by Iran, that could be it, to try and deplete Israel's air defenses, right?
We know it. I think Iran doesn't have the capability at the moment of orchestrating a large barrage of ballistic missiles. So if Iran wants to cause a lot of damage, even with a small number of ballistic missiles, then submunition missiles, with bomblets will be the weapon of choice.
The weapon of choice as Iran pursues a war of attrition, one missile at a time.
And Aaron, we did reach out to the Iranian government for comment on this. They did not respond in terms of why they are using these cluster munitions, but we spoke with weapons experts who said, you know, these really don't have much military value. If you're trying to hit a target, you're not going to use a munition that's going to spread out over potentially 7 miles of an area. And so it's clear that this is indiscriminate. It's clear that it's intended to not only evade Israel's air defenses, but also to disrupt life here. I mean, every time one of these missiles goes into the air, millions of people are forced to go into bomb shelters, and obviously they're relatively safe if they do go into bomb shelters from these relatively small bombs, but as we've seen, 2 people killed so far, and the disruption really
You've been to so many of the sites, and the one where 2 people were killed, I went to. What I was struck by was exactly that, that it's a suburban neighborhood. You go in, and the impact location itself is incredibly small, right? It's just the terror is that anybody could be standing there.
Exactly.
And they were standing there, you know, and as you say, that's what terrorizes civilian populations. All right, Jeremy Diamond, thank you so much. And obviously really crucial to see this as we're hearing about the potential of new munitions being used, that Jeremy is confirming this already on cluster munitions. Democratic Senator Tammy Duckworth joins me now. She's on the Senate Armed Services, Veterans Affairs, and Foreign Relations Committees. Senator Duckworth is also an Iraq War veteran. And Senator, I appreciate your time, and I want to start with the deadly strike on a girls' school in Iran here, and that is 2 sources are telling us that the preliminary findings of a U.S. military investigation, which is still ongoing, say that the U.S. is to blame, likely due to using outdated information about a nearby naval base when they did their targeting. How troubling is this when just the very basics of it, the use of outdated information for the targeting?
Well, it is incredibly troubling to me, and it should be to all of us, because it shows the lack of coordination and prior planning and how rushed this process was conducted by the Trump administration. Frankly, I want to know who actually cleared the targeting of an area right next to the girls' school or the girls' school itself. Why was there not better coordination? And you know, Pete Hegseth recently called silly rules of engagement silly. Well, you know what? The rules of engagement are there for a reason. But I think this speaks completely to the rushed nature of this effort by the Trump administration. And I would really want to know who is actually going through the target protocols and who's clearing these targets for attack.
Yeah, I know there's been a lot of questions about, you know, how the list was compiled and how much, you know, what human beings were checking of the list. And I know there are so many questions to be answered there. President Trump, Senator, today said, quote, "I don't know about that," when he was asked about these preliminary reports about the investigation. You know, and he obviously has declared victory as well. But are you worried about retaliation in this case, and specifically retaliation on American soil?
Well, I think Donald Trump has made Americans less safe by attacking Iran. I don't think that there was a justifiable reason for this. And frankly, you know, we've already lost service members, and I would expect that we're going to lose more. And if they're going to retaliate, this is all on Donald Trump. He decided to do this. The responsibility rests with him. He is the commander-in-chief, and he chose to go to war without coming first to Congress. And you can see how haphazardly they're conducting this war. They seem to be surprised that the war is spreading. Why would you be surprised? Anybody, you know, basic military intelligence would tell you that immediately an attack like this would draw in our allies, would draw in, would put Americans in the region in greater danger. And I am deeply concerned that we are less safe today than before these attacks began by President Trump.
You bring up the soldiers who lost their lives, the service members, and we're now tonight, Senator, hearing from the survivor of the drone attack in Kuwait, in which 6 U.S. service members did die. Sergeant First Class Corey Hicks spoke out to ABC Minneapolis affiliate KSTP about what he saw when that attack happened and what he's experiencing now, and I wanted to play him for everyone.
Turning my head to the left, and I seen the nose of that drone pop through, and as soon as it did, I knew what it was. Turned to my right, and that's when it blew up and just blew the whole building apart. I got shrapnel wounds on my arm, and severed an artery, impact my groin area, and I still have shrapnel coming out of me. It's just popping out of.
Senator, of course, you serve on Armed Services and Veterans Affairs, but you're a veteran yourself. You've suffered yourself with injuries. I mean, what do you say to Sergeant Hicks right now and other American service members who we know some are injured with minor injuries, others with very, very serious critical ones?
I say to them that I understand the valor with which they serve, and that I will strive every day that I'm in the United States Senate to honor that by doing my job, to hold the Trump administration accountable, to hold those who decide whether or not we go to war accountable, to have those decisions made in a way that is deliberate and we know why we're going. We know whether or not these, we were under imminent attack. We know whether or not what the end state will be. You know, the Trump administration is hiding behind the valor of our men and women in uniform. They will always perform to the maximum capability of their professionalism. They will always step up and say, yes, sir, I will execute the mission. The problem is who's giving those orders? And frankly, Donald Trump has not done his job. He's not come to Congress and justified to us why this was necessary. And then he chooses to hide behind the valor of our men and women in uniform, and then he treats them with a pittance. You know, he's cut funding for the VA. He's fired more veterans than any other president in American history. And he said very casually, oh, this is war, more will die. Well, you know what? It's people like those who have already laid down their lives. It's our men and women in uniform in harm's way today will continue to show up. The least we can do in the United States Senate is have a debate about whether or not this is justified. And the least the Trump administration can do is come to us and say, what is next? What exactly is the end state? What is the off-ramp? What is the goal you're trying to achieve? And we will make sure that they do that.
Yeah. Senator Duckworth, I appreciate your time. Thank you very much. All right, we are back with this special edition of Out Front, the war with Iran, and we have breaking news right now. Dramatic new video into Out Front showing the moment an Iranian drone hit a fuel storage tank at a port in Oman, causing a massive explosion. Emergency crews are still waiting to put out the fire at that port. Oman, of course, had been the key mediator in the